H.P. Lovecraft and Victor LaValle. I apologize for going over Lovecraft again, but I feel like this is pretty important information. So, Howard Phillips Lovecraft, he was born in 1890 in Providence. He died in 1937 in Providence from intestinal cancer, and his last words were, "I am Providence." He lived most of his life in the New England region. He was the author of 66 plus fictional stories and an additional 30 that were co-written with other authors. He considered himself primarily a poet at one time, much like Edgar Allan Poe, and he also wrote pieces of amateur journalism, literary criticism, science, mainly chemistry and astronomy. He also wrote some things about travel, philosophy, some autobiographical material, and over 100,000 letters throughout his lifetime. He's best known for the Cthulhu mythos and for pioneering the cosmic horror genre. When it comes to the horror at Red Hook, it was written in 1925 while Lovecraft lived in the Red Hook slums. He tried and failed selling to detective publishers, so Weird Tales magazine bought and published it. It's not considered part of the Cthulhu mythos today generally, but it does have ties to two of his other stories, Martense Street and the god Magnemeter. Robert Soydam's house is described as a lonely house set back from Martense Street, and in his other story, The Lurking Fear, the Martense family were a family of subterranean cannibals. And then when it comes to Magnemeter, which is a god worshipped by the cult, that god is also worshipped by a cannibalistic cult in Lovecraft's story, The Rats in the Walls. I think it's also important to mention that this story came out during the New Negro movement of the 1920s. This was a renewed sense of racial pride, cultural self-expression, economic independence, and progressive politics based in New York, so this is something that Lovecraft would have been surrounded by while writing this story. And then to the right is the original illustration for the story that was published by Weird Tales magazine. To me, it looks like there's a bunch of demons, like what Malone must have saw through the portal in Sodam's basement. And I'm actually not sure whether the man is Malone or Sodam. Maybe you guys could help me figure that out. As for critical reception of both H.P. Lovecraft and the horror at Red Hook, Nicole Cushing, who's the winner of the Bram Stoker for her book Mr. Suicide, and she was also nominated for the Shirley Jackson Award twice, she said, "H.P. seems obsessed with the theme of white supremacy, taking opportunities to shoehorn it into stories even when it's totally unnecessary." Len Carter, who's a famous author and critic who sometimes wrote under the parody name H.P. Lovecraft, called the horror at Red Hook a piece of literary vitriol. Peter Cannon, who's a Lovecraft scholar and a Cthulhu mythos author, said racism makes a poor premise for a horror story. Elizabeth Bear is a speculative fiction writer with many top awards. She said, "I feel moved to explore his work in part because it's such an uncomfortable blend of the unsettling and the problematic." Neil Gaiman, who's a famous author and winner of the Hugo, Nebula, Stoker, and many more awards, said, "He simply gave you a vision of an impossibly inhospitable universe in which we are screwed." And S.T. Joshi is a literary critic specializing in the life and work of Lovecraft and associated writers, and he called the story horrendously bad for its racist language. Neil Gaiman also said this in The Eldritch influenced the life, vision, and phenomenon of H.P. Lovecraft. The interesting thing is in Lovecraft, people don't do the wrong thing in the way that you normally do in horror fiction. In horror fiction, you do the wrong thing, you go into the shop and you buy the cat-headed object that you probably shouldn't or whatever, and everything goes bad. In Lovecraft, you simply get a room in the wrong place, you move to the wrong town, read the wrong story, you're just screwed. As for Howie's thoughts on his story, The Horror at Red Hook, in a letter he said that the tale was rather long and rambling, and I don't think it was very good, but it represents at least an attempt to extract horror from an atmosphere to which you deny any qualities save vulgar commonplaces. The story was published in a book of the British anthology series Not at Night, and very few of his stories were published in books during his lifetime, so this probably means that the story was received generally well by at least some publishers compared to his other stories. As for my thoughts on the horror at Red Hook, I was surprised that the story was able to hold my attention without any dialogue. There are quotation marks, but there is actually no, as far as I could find, two people talking to each other in the story. I'm also interested in the overt racism, and I think we should be discussing that, especially because this story is widely regarded as one of Lovecraft's most racist stories. And I also liked the frame structure, how it opened the story with the Malone mystery of his phobia of tall buildings, and that kept me immediately intrigued as a reader. I also loved Lovecraft's carefully crafted, complex, archaic, and verbose language and descriptions, which we have seen in all of his stories so far. And I also liked the scene where Malone is in Soidam's basement and sees the hellscape. And then here are my questions for the horror at Red Hook. So next up we got Victor Mr. Clapback LaValle. He was born in 1972 and raised in Queens, New York. He earned an English bachelor's at Cornell University and a master's in fine arts and creative writing at Columbia University. Right now, he's the author of 5 novels and a short story collection, and he's also written essays and book reviews for various magazines, including GQ and the Washington Post. He's written a comic for Marvel Comics called Sabretooth the Adversary, and his X/Twitter bio reads, "I just produce, create, innovate on a higher level. I'll be back, but for now, just cycle." And that's a line from a song called My Philosophy by Boogie Down Productions. He is mixed race with a white father and a Ugandan mother who immigrated to America in her 20s, and I'm not sure when, but I do know that his mother did divorce his father, and I'm pretty sure his father is mostly out of the picture in his life. As for the Ballad of Black Tom, it received 3.85 out of 5 stars on Goodreads with over 30,000 ratings, and 4.3 out of 5 stars on Amazon with over 5,000 ratings. The book came out in February of 2016 and saw a huge spike in Google searches during 2020, and I believe this is mostly a result of the BLM movement and America's intense focus on race at that time in 2020. The horror at Red Hook has seen consistent searches since February of 2016 when LaValle's book came out, and I think it's safe to say that from the chart, LaValle has massively contributed to the story's popularity. I also came across dozens of reviews of the horror at Red Hook in my short time searching through them, where readers said they were only reading Lovecraft's tale, The Horror at Red Hook, in preparation of LaValle's novella. As for critical reception of Victor LaValle and The Ballad of Black Tom, Nina Allen, author of The Rift, commended LaValle for making The Horror at Red Hook into an actual story featuring real characters with real motivations, a claim that cannot be safely made for the original tale, but she also observed that when compared to the vivid lunacy of Lovecraft's writing, LaValle's prose is grounded and sound in both mind and body, and it is ultimately pedestrian. The Philadelphia Inquirer preferred LaValle's sharp and direct sentences to Lovecraft's purple, spongy prose. Elizabeth Hand, who's a famous author of many stories with many awards, said that LaValle cleverly subverts Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos by imbuing a black man with the power to summon the Old Ones, and creates genuine chills with his evocation of the monstrous sleeping king, an echo of Lovecraft's Dagon. And then Laird Barron, author of The Beautiful Thing That Awaits Us All, said LaValle's novella of sorcery and skullduggery in Jazz Age New York is a magnificent example of what weird fiction can and should do. As for awards, the novella was shortlisted for the Bram Stoker, Hugo, Nebula, Focus, Theodore Sturgeon, and World Fantasy Award, and it ended up winning the Shirley Jackson and the British Fantasy Award. Also, AMC had plans to adopt his novella into a TV series in 2017, so I wasn't able to find any more information on that, but I'm assuming since there's no more information since 2017 that the show is not going to come out, but I might be wrong about that. As for LaValle's thoughts on the Ballad of Black Tom, he was asked in an interview, "Do you think you might revisit the Cthulhu mythos again in the future?" And he said, "Hell yeah, I've been thinking through the next chapter in the Black Tom story. Some of the reviews I've read stated that they wished it had gone on longer. I've really warmed to this idea. I've started writing the next novella. It would come right after the events in the Ballad of Black Tom. It wouldn't be a straight continuation, like Malone wouldn't be in it, but it would take in elements of another Lovecraft story. This time I won't retell the tale. Instead, I'm going to simply mix in another character and the circumstances from his story and pour it into my own. I'm very excited about it, actually. I think there's a lot more to explore in this world I'm building." And he was interviewed by Douglas Wynne, author of the Lovecraftian novel Red Equinox. As for my thoughts on the Ballad of Black Tom, I love the way that the title mirrors that of Lovecraft's story. The Horror at Red Hook and the Ballad of Black Tom, they both have the same structure and there's some similar alliteration going on. I like the parallel plot structure that followed both Malone and Tom. I thought Victor LaValle handled that very well and it made for more interesting perspectives. I thought that Black Tom was a really powerful figure and force as a character, but I'm not fully convinced yet that his motives and character were fully developed. Maybe you guys could change my mind. And lastly, I appreciated how Victor LaValle respectfully used Lovecraft's tale to tell his own that modern audiences can more so enjoy. And here are my discussion questions for the Ballad of Black Tom.